Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
It gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for this evening, Mike A. from Nashville, Tennessee.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Allison. I'm an alcoholic. Hi. My sobriety date is February the 12th, 1990, and my home group is the Brentwood Full Moon Group. The Full Moon Group meets every Friday night at 6:30. Brentwood is just south of Nashville. We've got an open discussion meeting and a newcomers meeting. We also have an open speaker meeting the last Friday of the month, and we also have an Al-Anon and Alateen meeting at the same time in the same building. So if you're ever in the Nashville area, we would love to have you. It's a real honor to be here at the 45th Annual San Fernando Valley AA Conference. I'm glad to be here. I want to thank Jimmy J and all the committee members for putting this on. I'm just overwhelmed at this thing. This is just amazing. Thanks for the basket in my room with all the goodies in it. I just got off a 2-week cruise with my wife, and just the last thing I need was a whole bunch more junk food to eat. So thanks a lot, and thanks for all the gifts to remember this weekend by. This is just really cool. And I want to thank Debbie out there for asking me and getting me here, making arrangements to get me here, and for Taryn for picking me up at the airport, and her husband Joel. You guys have just made me feel a part of here and loved and supported, and I really appreciate you doing that. I want to thank the people that are recording this, and not because it's me. When I was new, my sponsor would just give me cassettes, speaker cassettes. And I don't remember me asking him, or him asking me, do you want to listen to this? It was like, listen to this. And I could plug that cassette in, and it was a voice louder than my head at the time, because I had this grand central head with all these things talking to me, and I could plug that in, and I could be okay driving around. And speaker talks have always meant a lot to me. I listen to a lot of speaker CDs to this day. It helps keep me in the game. It's one more thing to take this edge. And what I'm finding out is in the age of the internet and free everything, music and everything else, there's a lot of people's talks. You can just Google their name and their AA talk will come up. And what I'm saying is the people that record these things are recording our history. There's a lot of people that I listen to that aren't here anymore. And all we have are their recordings. And if we don't support the people that record these things, sooner or later they're not going to come. And that's just something I want you to consider, because it's a really valuable service that you're recording our history. And thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate that. I got here yesterday afternoon, and I went to the participation meeting. And everybody was getting up and sharing. It seemed like they've been coming to this thing for forever, some of them 20 and 30 years. And there was one guy in there that stood up. And is Mike from Colorado in here? Is he in here? If he's upstairs, I want you to raise your hand, let everybody know who you are up there, because I got something to say to you. Mike said that he came here from Colorado, that he found out about this conference, and he said, all the good speakers are in California. They come from California, and he drove all the way here from Colorado to hear a California speaker. And I just want to tell you, dude, you need to be on your way down to get a refund, because they sent a hillbilly from Tennessee tonight. I'm not from California. Okay, enough of that. Oh, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love it. It's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, and maybe my family as well. When I came here, I was 39 years old. I had my own business. I've been married for 15 years. I had 2 sons that were 8 and 11. I had all the right stuff because I thought if you had all the stuff, then you'd act like you were successful and you were somebody. And by the time I was 39, alcoholism had just taken everything good and decent in me and just thrown it in the trash. I was just a savage person. I was broken. I didn't have any hope. I didn't have any direction. I was full of resentments, and I just wanted to die every day. It was just one miserable day after another. And I didn't know what to do. And thank God I wound up with you people. I just can't, it amazes me that I'm still here in AA and that I get to have this good life. But alcoholism didn't start out that way for me. I mean, both my parents worked really hard. They started a business about the time I was born, and they worked really hard every day, and then they'd come home and they'd drink at night to unwind. And then on the weekends, they'd drink with their friends and party. And everybody seemed like they had a great time. You know, every now and then somebody would overshoot the mark, and bad things would happen. But I thought that's what you do. You work hard and you drink. So when I was about 14 or 15 years old, I went out with some older boys one night, and somebody had got a bottle of Gilby's gin out of somebody's liquor cabinet, out of their parents' liquor cabinet, and they're passing it around in the car. And I took a drink out of it, and I thought it tasted awful. But you drink, you know. That's what you're supposed to do. So I got past the taste of it pretty quick. And I'll just cut to the chase. I overshot the mark the very first time because everybody else didn't want any, and I drank it all. And I had a great time until I don't remember anything. And these guys took me home, and I barely remember walking down the hallway of my parents' house back to my bedroom, and I got in the bed, and the room started spinning. And are we just the only ones that put our foot on the floor thinking that's going to stop the bed from spinning? But that didn't work, and I got violently ill. I mean, it was just awful. I remember it really well. And the next morning I got up, and I was just sick as a dog. I remember my mother was on the phone to one of her friends saying, "Oh, Mike was so sick last night. You know, he had some kind of stomach virus." So I got away with it. And it never occurred to me, I'm not doing that anymore. Maybe I won't drink gin anymore, but it gave me that feeling that I've been looking for. I mean, it gave me that feeling when I was just there. And I couldn't wait to do it again. And I didn't really know it at the time, but I built my whole life around drinking after that. I mean, I really did. And I didn't know that. My drinking escalated over a period of time, and I never really realized where it got me. But I used to say once I started drinking that my grades went down, but they weren't that good to start with in school. But I managed to get through high school, and I just drank at every occasion. And I was just the wild child. I mean, I'm the wild man, you know. Drive fast, music turned up to 11, and, you know, bare-chested, barefoot, and all that stuff. I was just a heathen. And I barely got out of high school, and my parents sent me off to college, where I went for 4 years in Memphis. And that was in 1968, and that's when the drug culture was really catching on in our area. So I picked up on all that, and I want to tell you, I'm a real alcoholic. I mean, I'm a real alcoholic, but I love all those party favors that are out there, too. And so I start taking all these things to supercharge my drinking, and when I think I'm drinking too much, I slow down on my drinking and amp up on these other things. So I stay in college for 4 years, and I just basically just throw the time away, you know, just party the time away. And I'm a guy that starts out with the best intentions. Anybody else like that? I mean, I'm going to do this. But I never did finish anything. I lacked 6 hours of getting a degree in business management, and I dropped out of college because I knew I could go to work for this family business that I'd work for during the summer and after school. But about the time I was about to drop out of college, I meet the lady that's my wife, Diane. Some of you know Diane. And she was at the opposite end of the state at another university, but we started this. I mean, we just fell madly in lust. It was great. And I just love her to death to this day. I mean, she still says of all the alcoholics and drug addicts she's ever dated, she likes me best. And that's as good as it gets for a guy like me. But anyway, we start dating. I drop out of college, and she drops out of college, and I move back to Nashville, and I go back to work for this family business. And I was always a hard worker, and I was ambitious and aggressive and all this stuff. And so I go to work for the family business that I knew I was going to be destined to be a part of. And she comes back, and we're dating. So I'm working hard, and I'm playing hard. And after about a year and a half, she and I weren't getting along. Now, I wasn't the best boyfriend there was, but she was trying to manage me a little bit too much, I thought. Sometimes I thought she was going to just help me to death. And I didn't have any communication skills at all. So one day, I didn't know how to talk to her about it. And I just told her one day, we're through. I just broke up with her. And I didn't tell her why I was breaking up with her. Matter of fact, I didn't tell her till several years ago, finally. And so she goes off and gets on with her life, and I'm working hard and I'm playing hard. And about a year goes by, and I had to get my wisdom teeth out. And, they give you a whole bunch of drugs to do that. And so I go in, and they tell me that I'm going to have somebody drive me back home. And I get my office manager to go with me, and they, give me this IV full of stuff, and they could have pulled my jaw out. I wouldn't have cared. And they take my wisdom teeth out, and this guy leads me out to the car and brings me back to my apartment. And he said, look, I got to go back to work, and you're a mess. I need somebody to come over and take care of you. Is there somebody I can call till this stuff wears off? And I'm just loaded. And I get this, I couldn't talk, so I start writing down, call Diane, and I wrote her work number down. Now, this guy knew I dated Diane, but he had no idea I'd been broken up with her for a year. But he picks up the phone, and he calls her, and he says, hey, Diane, this is George, and Mike's had his wisdom teeth out. He wants you to come over and take care of her. Some Al-Anons love that, don't they? They love that call. He needs me. And I love the program of Al-Anon. Who else would love us? I wouldn't be married without the program of Al-Anon. But at any rate, she came over on her lunch break, and I'm just loaded, man. And I start writing down again, I love you. I want you back. Move in with me. You know how we are. We just go A to Z. And she did 2 days later, and we've been together ever since. That was March 18th of 1975, and every March 18th we celebrate Tooth Day. So, and at any rate, so she moves back in with me. Well, by the way, she had another guy living with her when I told her this. But she said that was the easiest breakup she ever had. And I tell you that because I was on drugs that day. And I told you I'm an alcoholic. I'm in my mid-20s at that time, and I can't make decisions without being loaded on either drinking or the other stuff, or I couldn't get past my fear and my pride to let this woman know that I really loved her and I really wanted to try to have a relationship with her. And I couldn't do those kinds of things unless I was under the influence of something, because I was so full of fear all the time. Alcohol and drugs had already taken over everything in my life in my mid-20s. So we get back together, and I take some more of these party favors a couple months later and just look at her and said, let's get married. And so we did a couple months later, and we're off and running. And she was working at the time, and I'm working hard, and I'm starting to really do well in this business. And we had a couple of kids. Like I said, we have 2 sons. They were 8 and 11 when I got sober. And I'm working hard, and I'm playing hard, but my alcoholism is just getting worse all the time. I start thinking I've got this high-pressure job, so I go to my doctor because I got all this anxiety, so he gives me some tranquilizers, and then later on I start getting these migraine headaches, so he prescribes me some painkillers. And then I was having these big-time mood swings, and so he put me on antidepressants, and I was on those for 9.5 years. And turns out I didn't have clinical depression. I had untreated alcoholism. But I was taking all that stuff, and I was getting all this other stuff from undocumented sources and washing it down with Crown Royal and trying to just power through life and be somebody. And I started doing some really crazy stuff. I used to be in the landscaping business. Actually, I was in the grass business. I used to say the legal kind, but it's legal now too. So, but at any rate, I was in the landscaping business. And my wife and I bought a house. We still live there. It's up on a dead-end street on a really high hill. It's one of the highest elevations in the Nashville area. And everybody on our street, most of the people on our street don't have any landscaping at all in their houses. They just have their houses in the woods. And our house was just in the woods. But when we moved up there, I think I'm this big shot landscaping guy, and I'm going to show off my expertise. So I'm trying to grow grass in front of my house, and I can't do it because of all these trees. Because they'd shade the grass out in the summertime, and then the leaves had fallen. I'd have to rake all these leaves. And one day I just thought, well, I'll just cut all my trees down. And that might have been okay, but I really wasn't exactly sure where my property line was on one side of it. I knew where it was at the street. I knew where the boundary was there, but our lot goes way down this steep hill. I mean, I've lived there since 1976, and I've only been down there 2 or 3 times. I mean, it is straight up and down. But I get my plat and a compass, and I wander down this hillside, and I find this iron pin in the ground, and I convince myself that's my property line. And then I called a surveyor up, and I said, look, I found my property line, but I can't even see my house, and I need you to mark this line. And these guys came out, and I took them down the hillside, and they looked at it, and they said, man, we don't think this is right. But I'm an alcoholic. I have this laser beam focus, and I know everything. And if I'm paying you, you're going to do it my way anyway. You know, I'm right. And so these guys did what I told them to do. And when they got through, the stakes and flags were almost touching my next-door neighbor's house. And a sane person would have thought, well, you know, maybe you got this wrong. But the only thing went through my mind is that old goat, he's been using my land all this time. He built this house before we were here, and he's using my property. And as I said, and by the way, I found out since I got sober that you don't even, if you need a property line found, you can just call a surveyor up, and they'll come out and they'll find the property line for you. You don't even have to tell them where you think it is. And so I don't have any communication skills. Again, I think I'm right. The man's out of town with his wife in Florida, and I'm not going to talk to him about that. I want these trees gone. So I call a buddy of mine that had a tree surgery company, and he sends these 2 big bucket trucks and all these guys with chainsaws, and they cut all these trees down between our house. And it was a lot of trees. According to a jury of my peers, it was $50,000 worth of trees in 1984. Yeah. Because when he got home, he wasn't happy with my surveying. And he sued me, and he should have sued me. Whew. My story's about forgiveness and redemption. I want to tell you what a wonderful man my next-door neighbor turned out to be and how he changed my life. But there wasn't any of this going on right now. Because when he got home, he sued me. And I just thought the trees were in the way. I thought they were mine and they were in the way. You know, I was like a tornado roaring through the lives of others. And, you know, this man spent 3 years of Saturdays and Sunday afternoons building his dream home for he and his wife, and I cut the trees down of his dream home. So he was not happy. And when he sued me, he asked for a jury trial, which was kind of unusual in a civil case. And so I had to sit through a 2-day jury trial. And I remember I dressed up in a 3-piece suit, big vest, and a gold chain and a pocket watch. And I go strutting in this courtroom like I'm some dignified businessman that's been falsely accused. And I'd sweated all the way through the suit. And I was eating these blue Valiums during the recess to try to act calm while his attorney just portrayed me as a lunatic for doing this. And at the end of the 2-day trial, the jury awarded him the $50,000 he asked for, and they added $5,000 more punitive damages to it that he didn't even ask for. Now, if you're new tonight, I'm trying to describe what a resentment is, because I hate this guy. I think he's overreacted, you know. I didn't mean to do it. I thought they were mine. So I hate this guy. So the next several years, every time I'd see him on our dead-end street, I'd ease my car over in his lane like I was playing chicken with him. I'd curse at him when he was getting his mail. I was just awful to these people. And I used to say I didn't hurt anybody but myself when I got here, and that's such a lie. You know, my wife and my young sons used to go visit these people during the day when I was working. But Diane hadn't been to Al-Anon yet. And she didn't have any skills either, and she sided with me, so she didn't go over there anymore. And I deprived them of that relationship all those years. And, I have her permission to say, she said if I did that today, she'd carry on a relationship with those people regardless of whether I was a lunatic or not. And so I deprived them of that relationship. And one thing I did, I don't know about you guys, but when I'd get mad at somebody, I didn't want to get even. I wanted to get ahead. I was a terribly vindictive person. I wanted revenge. And so a couple of years before I cut his trees down and he sued me, he came to me one time and he said, I know you're in the landscaping business. Can you get my wife a weeping cherry tree? She said, that's the prettiest tree she thinks it is. Can you get us one of those? I said, sure, I can do that. What else you want? And he said, well, I don't want anything else that I know of. And I said, well, go ask her if there's any other shrubbery. And I think he thought I was trying to sell him something, but I was just trying to be a big shot. And he came back and he told me a couple other bushes of some kind he wanted. I can't remember what they were. And I asked him where he was going to plant the stuff, and he told me. And so I got one of my crews to go out and get this big weeping cherry tree and these other plants and plant them in his yard. And the man came over to me and he said, look, I really appreciate you doing this. I didn't mean for you to plant the stuff. I was just hoping that you'd get it for me. How much do I owe you? He was just trying to do business with his neighbor. But me, the big shot, oh, you don't owe me anything. And it's like, look at me. I've got this company. I got these people. I can do these things, and I don't need your money. So I wouldn't let him pay me. Well, a couple of years later, after I cut his other trees down and he sued me, I went over there the very next night with some herbicide and put on the weeping cherry tree and that other stuff and killed it. I can always tell how many Al-Anons are here. Because AAs always go, ah, the Al-Anons go, oh. That's how I was treating my next door neighbor. By the time I'm in my mid-30s, my life just starts unraveling. I started cheating on my wife. I knew it was wrong when I was doing it. That's just what I was doing. And I knew I was doing the wrong thing, but I was caught in that spiral. And my father left the business a couple of years after I got started, and then he left the business for several years to take another position, and when he came back 4 years later, he wanted his job back. And I told him, why don't you just retire? I got this now. So I fought him over the business. It's a man that, made it possible for me to be in that business. And he drank like I did, so we didn't get along. It was just a war. So I'm not getting along with my dad, and I'm doing all the wrong things, and I'm just hating one day after another. My dad would come out to my office every day, and he'd say he wanted to help me. And he'd stand over my desk and tell me how he was going to help me that day. And I didn't know how to talk to him about it. And I brought my shotgun to work one day, and I told myself that I was going to shoot the tires and the windows out of his Buick when he pulled in the parking lot to let him know I didn't want him around. And I went home, but I didn't do it. I don't know whether I was afraid of my dad or God kept me from doing it, but I didn't do it. He even asked me, said, what's your shotgun doing back here? But I went home and I told my wife what I'd done or what I thought about doing. And she tried to fix all my problems for years. And she just said, you just need to go talk to somebody. I don't know what to tell you. So I went to my doctor one more time, who'd been trying to take care of me for years. And I went to him and I said, look, I don't know whether you want to put me in a nut house or what, but I was going to assassinate a Buick this morning, and I know that's not good. And he said, well, go see this lady. So he sets me up with a psychologist. And I'd been to psychologists and counselors and all kinds of people for all my life, and they'd give me a little relief for a while, but I'd always get drunk, and it was that seemed to take care of it at the time. But this time I was just getting crazy. So I decided I'm not going to drink before I go see this this psychologist on a Monday. And I'd quit drinking on my own from time to time. I didn't know anything about alcoholism or recovery. I thought if you're drinking too much and it gets in the way, you just stop, and then you got a handle on it. I even quit for 8.5 months one time. It was the most miserable 8.5 months I've ever had in my life. But I'd quit before, but I'd always start again because I'd get so miserable because alcoholism is so much more painful when I'm not drinking. But I didn't drink that weekend. And I went to see this lady on a Monday, and I go see her at 10 o'clock, and I even wrote down how much she was charging me and everything for like 50 minutes. And I thought I was going to get to tell her what a rotten guy my dad was, and my wife was on my back, and I had these kids in private schools who are getting harder to fund and all this stuff. And I go in there, and the first thing the lady says, well, I want to ask you a few questions before we get started. She said, how much do you drink? I said, I don't drink. She said, you don't drink at all? I said, no, I don't. And she said, well, have you ever drank? I said, yeah, I used to. And she said, well, how long ago did you stop drinking? I said, Thursday. Honest. And that was even a lie. I found an old calendar. I actually quit on Friday. I guess if I thought I added a day to it, it'd sound like a long time. I don't know. And really, I thought if you're not drinking, drinking's not a problem if you can stop. And she said, well, before you quit drinking, how much did you drink? And I really didn't know. I mean, I had supplies of everything all around me, all vehicles and my workplace and garages and everywhere. My old buddy Tom said I used to clink in the wintertime because I carried these Crown Royal miniatures in my pocket, my little men, I called them. So I said, I really don't know, but I told her as best I could how much I drank. And then she asked me something that morning that just was one of those moments. She said, do you take any drugs? And when she said that, it was like, I can't do this anymore. I was just so tired of the life I had. I said, yeah. It's like somebody lifted a rock off of me and the sunlight hit me. I said, yeah, I take some drugs. And she said, what kind of drugs do you take? And I told her about all the stuff I had prescriptions for and all the stuff I was getting from these outside sources. And she said, do you have any drugs with you now? And I said, yes, I do. And she said, well, what kind of drugs do you have? And I reached in my pocket and I pulled out my change and I started counting these pills that were just loose in my change. And I had 37 blue Valiums loose in my change, and she thought that was a lot. But I'd quit drinking on Friday, and I was a little jumpy, so I bought 100 of them, and that's what I had left over on Monday. I mean, I was just dying, and I had no clue. And she said, well, before we go any further, I want you to have an addiction evaluation done. And I thought, lady, I got real problems here. I got my father's on my back and all that. I mean, I had no clue that I was in such grave danger. I really didn't have a clue. So I leave her office and I go to this other trained professional she sets me up with, and I go with my wife this time, and we fill out these forms, and the guy gets us together with the forms, and he said, this is not rocket science. This is really standard stuff. And he said, from what you've written down here, he said, you've been an alcoholic for about 15 years. And he said, if you don't get some help pretty soon, you're probably going to die. And the first thing goes through my mind is, how could you say that in front of my wife? I mean, I don't know about you, but my ego will kill me trying to protect itself, And Diane hadn't been to Al-Anon yet. She said, what can I do? And the guy said, pack his bags. Because the guy said, I need to go to treatment, go to AA. And I said, look, I can't go away for 30 days. I got this business I got to run, And he said, if you don't do something about your lifestyle, you don't know worry about your business, you're going to be dead. And so the guy says, look, there's an outpatient program I know of I can refer you to. You can work during the day and go at night. So they kept shutting the doors on me. So I agree to go see this lady at the treatment center. In the next couple of days before I see the lady in the treatment center, I'm seeing all these billboards around town for treatment centers at that time, and I'm thinking, I'm not that bad. These people just know I got good insurance. They're trying to rip me off. I mean, I really didn't know I was powerless over alcohol. I'd go from, I can't stand to live in my skin another 30 seconds to, well, I'm not that bad. I'd just go back and forth like that. It was horrible. It was a horrible existence. But I go see the lady at the treatment center, and she tells me about her program, and I said, look, that's great for you people. You're doing a fine job here. But I'm busy, and I know how to quit on my own. I'll just quit again, and then I'll come back this fall when I'm not so busy and do your program or your classes, whatever you're talking about. And she looked at me like I had three heads, She said, just because you quit drinking doesn't mean you're going to quit hurting. And that's the first time I ever heard anything that connected anything about what really alcoholism is. I mean, I thought if you're not drinking, that you're okay. But I found out since I've come here, I don't just have a drinking problem. If you got a drinking problem, just quit drinking. You'll be fine. When I quit drinking, I'm just, it's like somebody stripped the insulation off my wiring and plugged me into a 220. And I really wasn't sure. I had a lot of stuff, so I was thinking, well, you know, I'm not that bad. I hadn't lost everything and divorce and blah, 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 which all that was heading that way. But I didn't get a satisfactory answer why I need to be here until my sponsor took me to hear Clancy in Memphis. And Clancy said two things that night that told me why I belong here. He said the natural state of a sober alcoholic without recovery is growing depression and anxiety. When I quit drinking, man, my anxiety and depression just goes through the roof. And the other thing he said is the thing that makes alcoholism a fatal disease is that sobriety eventually becomes emotionally unbearable. And that's my problem. When I'm sober, I was really uncomfortable. You know, I didn't fit in. I was just a misfit. So I was willing to try that. And I actually told, we were talking about all the areas where we would, anything to get over on somebody. And I actually asked Diane, I said, do you think if I go to this treatment program, it'll help me with my father? And she said, well, I don't know, it probably will. And you know, the only reason why I asked her that is if it didn't work out, I could blame her. And I just did that without thought. You know, that's how manipulating I was at the time. So I go to this treatment center, and they said that I had to go to 5 AA meetings a week. And I said, you mean 5 AA meetings? And they said, no, 5 a week. And I said, look, I'm too busy. I can't do that. But I'm standing up here, 29 years sober in a few days, and, you know, I average about 5 meetings a week because I got to participate in my own recovery. I don't know about you guys. I am so much more comfortable and content and safe to build my life around AA rather than build AA around my life when it's convenient, you know. And but I thought it was a big challenge then, but I did it one day at a time. And I found out about the Full Moon group. It's still my home group, and I go over there the first night, and I dress up, and I got there late. And I don't know what AA is. You know, I pull in the parking lot, and the parking lot's full of cars. They're parked on the grass and everything. I thought, man, I've come on the wrong night to this church. This must be having vacation Bible school or a bazaar or picnic or something, you know. I mean, I thought AA was a couple old guys in trench coats shaking and puking on each other. I didn't know what AA was. So I pull in there, and I get out of my car, and I'm walking across the parking lot, and here comes this rock and roll singer across the parking lot. And he's a cool guy. And I'm thinking, what's that guy doing here? You know, does he belong to this church, or he's going to do a benefit for him or something, you know? He can't be in this A&A thing. And the guy walks over to me, and he said, can I help you? And I said, well, you're so-and-so. And he said, yeah. And I introduced myself to him. I said, I really I love your voice and your band, and I always come see you at the Bluebird Cafe and any other places you're playing. He said, thanks, man, I appreciate it. He said, can I help you? And, you know, I'm embarrassed somebody's going to see me at an AA meeting. You know, now, I park my car in front of the front door of the Cockeyed Camel every day at 6 o'clock, and I didn't worry about that, but I was afraid somebody'd see me at this A&A thing. And finally, he said, can I help you? About 3 times. And I said, I heard there was an AA meeting here. And he said, yeah, mate, you're in the right place. And this guy opened the front door for me for my first meeting. And it wasn't long after that I found out he had 4 years of sobriety, this rock and roll guy. I mean, he might as well have been Bill W. for me. I mean, it just floored me that this guy could do rock and roll and was sober. So I go in there, and they seemed to know I was new. And they did a first step meeting for me. I'm so grateful for that. Man, they gave me love and service. I didn't know where else to go. You know, the gift of desperation it sure as hell doesn't feel like a gift when you're getting it, you know. But I had that gift of desperation. I didn't know where else to go. And I heard a guy say not long ago, said, you know, if you make it to AA, you might as well stay. So we don't refer you down to anywhere else. This is it. And they did a first step meeting for me, and they went around the room, and they told some of their stories. And one of the first guys that told his story was a guy named Joe, great big guy. He's like 6'6". And he said he'd had 2 DUIs in one day. Twice. And I never had a DUI because I got out all of them. So I'm thinking I'm not that bad. Another guy who's been my sponsor for a long, long time now, Terry, said he used to sleep with a pint of vodka every night because he had to. And he said he'd wake up in the middle of the night and he was shaking so bad that he'd pull that pint of vodka out and crack the top of it and drink about half of it to stop shaking, where he could go back to sleep for a couple hours till his alarm went off. And it's when his alarm would go off, he'd be shaking again, and he'd have to finish that pint off where he could shave and brush his teeth, put on a tie, and go to work as a corporate executive in an insurance company in Nashville. And I'm thinking, I'm not that bad. Now I'm sitting there in that meeting. I don't have anywhere else to go. I don't ever want to live anymore. I got a loaded 9mm Smith & Wesson pistol in my pocket, and I'm a dangerous person. And they asked me finally at the end, they said, you got anything you want to say, which was probably a mistake. And I said, well, I'm Mike. I've been diagnosed with clinical depression. And they all just died laughing. And my grand sponsor said if they'd known I had that pistol in my pocket that night, they wouldn't have laughed. So be careful who you laugh at. But at any rate, they gave me love and service, and they told me, we don't care what you do or what you don't do or what you got or don't have. Come on back. Come on back. And they told me where the next meeting was. And I picked up a white poker chip that night. And I finished this 6-week treatment program. It was the first thing I ever finished in my life. And they said I had to get a sponsor before they'd let me go. And so there was a guy in this home group meeting named Buff. And I thought he must be president of AA because everybody liked him, and he said a lot of good stuff in the meetings, and he even gave me his phone number the first night. So I thought, well, I'll get Buff to be my sponsor. But now when I'm not drinking, I'm scared and shy and afraid and don't like conflict and all that stuff, or rejection. So I get Buff in the back of the meeting, and I said, you know, Buff, before I get out of treatment next week, I got to get a sponsor. That was my way of asking him, you know. And he looks at me and he said, well, you ought to ask somebody, and walked off. And so the next meeting, I go to him and I said, Buff, will you be my sponsor? And he said, sure, I'll do that. He said, I want to tell you something. He said, I'm going to be bone-crushing honest with you, and I want you to be bone-crushing honest with me. He said, I go to a lot of meetings. He said, I don't know a lot about finance and romance. He said, I've been bankrupt and divorced before. He said, but if you'll take the 12 steps with me like I took them with my sponsor, your life's going to change whether you want it to or not. That's the best news anybody's ever given me. And I'd like to say I just took off and took all 12 steps as fast as I could. But, you know, it says in there when we're reading it how it works, it's some of these we balked. I balked at every one of the steps. I'd feel better by taking a little action, and then I'd quit until it got so painful I was either going to drink again or blow my brains out or move on to the next step. But I got the first 3 steps pretty easy because they're just decisions. And I'm going to meetings and I'm learning the lingo. I'm loving the relationships I'm building. And I think I'm just really doing swell on the first 3 steps. You know, I just said the 3rd step prayer. I thought, okay, God, you got this. I thought, man, I was in my home group one night and there was this old timer sitting next to me. And I said, you know, I think the promises are coming true for me and I'm only on the 3rd step. This guy looks at me, he said, you're doing the alcoholic waltz. 1, 2, 3, drunk. 1, 2, 3, drunk. I thought, you old goat, what do you know? I've been to treatment. I'm up to date. I got this new stuff, you know. You're an old timer. But I was going to meetings. I'm calling my sponsor, and I'm learning these prayers. You know, I didn't have any kind of prayer life at all. I'd pushed God out of my life a long time ago. But I was trying. Some days I thought I was just praying to air. I was just following directions sometimes. But I kept doing it, and something started changing. But I'm reading a book, and it's saying in there that we made amends to people we shared in a general way, and we were rigorously honest. And I was so consumed with guilt over cheating on my wife that I decided I need to make amends to her. And without talking to my sponsor, I got her in a conversation and told her in a general way that I'd been unfaithful to her and that I was going to be the husband she deserved from now on. And I really thought I was doing the right thing. I really did. You know, I didn't know that this book's not designed to hurt anybody. And it didn't go well. And by the way, if there's anybody thinking about doing that, I want you to see me just as soon as this meeting's over. I'm not kidding. That's not a joke. And I called my sponsor, and I told him this amends I made didn't go well. And he went thermonuclear. And I try to keep my language clean up here because I honor the the place of being able to be up here. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what he said, but I'll paraphrase it for you. He said, that's why they number the steps for smart college boys like you. He said, you hadn't even done a 4-step, much less the 9th step. And he said, by the way, Hoss, you didn't make amends to her. All you did was dump your guilt. Wow. And when he said that, it was like somebody stuck a knife through me, because I knew he was right. But I was sure, that's when I hit my bottom where I became teachable. Why in the world do I think I'm supposed to read this book and make sense out of it when I can follow somebody that's already been through the steps with their sponsor and do what they did? And so I got busy, and I started writing. And I got so uncomfortable after that I was either going to drink again or blow my brains out. I even checked my life insurance policies to see if they were good. I thought, well, my family would be better off with some money, and I'll be out of here. Which they want a husband and a father. I was crazy in sobriety. So I start writing these resentments down, and I wrote this, once I started writing, it was a big list. And I wrote what they'd done to me. In the 3rd column, I wrote down how it affected me, and I thought, hey, I kind of like this. Because I fancied myself as a people pleaser. I did all these things for people, then they turned on me. That's the way I looked, that's how I looked at myself. But then in the 4th column, I wrote down, what were my mistakes? What did I do to make the resentments worse? And for the first time in my life, I wrote down who I really was. Not who I thought I was or trying to make you think I was. It's how I treated people. And the greatest resentments I had were the people that were the closest to me that loved me the most. And so it says that we pray for those folks. So I prayed for those people on that 4-step list, and I made a fears list. And I've gone through my life with all these fears just bouncing in my head like a weed eater. And so I wrote my fears list down, and it was helpful to list in black and white what my fears were. And the book says we ask ourselves why we had them. So I write down all these elaborate reasons why I've got these fears, where I can figure out how to get them, analyze them. But that's just a drunk trap, because the next sentence in the book said, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And I looked at all my reasons, and I might as well just wadded them up and threw them in the trash can. I'd gone through my life just full of fear. I thought I had to just go through the world with my back against the wall and shoot my way out of any problems, and that's a terrible way to live. The book says we ask God to remove them and ask him what he would have us be. And that's a tool I never thought I had. So I started to understand that I don't analyze my fears and tough it out. I ask God to remove them and walk, do what I'm supposed to do. I did a sex inventory, and I'm telling you, I tried to remember every relationship I had, whether it was a one-night stand or this 15-year marriage I had with my wife at the time, and I might as well have written one story about how I treated women and just dumped all the names in there. Because I didn't know how to be a partner. It's not that I was a mean person, I just didn't know how to do it. And I thought that if I bought you enough stuff, I'd get what I wanted from you, and you'd stick around. And it was all about, look who I'm with. I didn't know how to be a partner, and thank God I've learned those skills from sponsors and grand sponsors and other men and other women in AA, how to be a partner. And at that time I thought, well, my wife didn't leave me because of stupid amends that I try to make. My marriage is never going to work out and bust, so why don't you just keep taking the steps and let God sort that out? So he showed me in the book where the people that were trying to get sober, the first 100, the ones that kept secrets invariably got drunk, as the book says. And he said, you'll probably drink again if you go to the grave without telling these secrets, And so I was, at this point in time, I'm really desperate. I want to do this stuff. So I wrote down all these secrets I had, and some of them I wrote in code. So if somebody found a piece of paper, they wouldn't know what it meant. And I go over to my sponsor's house on a Saturday morning, and he invites God in the room, and he said, what's the worst thing on your list? And I looked down at the code, and I told him something that I swore I'd never tell anybody. And I thought he'd say, that's it. What an order. And instead, he told me the worst thing that was on his 5-step list. This man loved me enough to tell me his deepest, darkest secrets, where I'd get comfortable enough to empty this garbage can I've been carrying around inside of me all these years. And so I told him all the stuff. Almost. I didn't tell him all the stuff. He said, is that it? And I looked down at the code, and there was some other stuff on there that was similar. And I thought, well, I've already told him this other stuff. I don't need to tell him that. I just justify my actions just like that. And so I leave. And by the way, all this stuff, my wife and I have always been open about this infidelity I had, and I want to be an open book to you guys. I don't want to get up here and pretend like I'm something I'm not. I want you to let you know who I really am. And sometimes I get tired of doing that and say, should I be talking about all this stuff in the past all the time? I get tired of talking about it sometimes. But you know what? I listened to a guy's fist up several months ago, and the guy was in the car with me, and I said, what's the worst thing on your list? And the guy told me something. And I asked him a question about it, and he gave me an answer. And after he did that, I told him the worst thing that was on my fifth step list. And all of a sudden, I could see a change in his eyes. There was a shift, and he said, I didn't tell you the truth a minute ago. Let me tell you what really happened. And by me bearing my soul of the worst stuff I've ever done, my dark past, it helped this guy unlock this stuff and get free of it. So that stuff has value. I hope I never forget that. But I leave my sponsor's house, and I'm on my way to my office because it says we review the first 5 steps. And I get about halfway down the street, and it hits me that I didn't tell him everything. And it freaks me out because there was a guy in my group that couldn't stay sober. He'd get sober for a while, and he'd do a little step work, and then he'd get drunk again. And he'd done a 5th step and left something out, and he got drunk over it about a week before. And that's the first time I thought, if I really think I'm a real alcoholic, I got to do all this stuff. I don't get to do it cafeteria style. If that guy got drunk by not telling a secret, I probably will too. And I picked up my phone, I called Buff, I said, look, I left something out. And he starts laughing. And I'm sweating because I'm having to admit my sponsor that I lied to him, and plus I didn't want to tell him this stuff. And I said, why are you laughing? He said, oh man, usually it takes a couple of hours before they call back. You're easy. And he says, what is it? And I told him, he said, I love you anyway. And I've got to tell a lot of men that I love you anyway. We're just trying to get rid of this past and get rid of these ghosts and get better. So I go to my office and I read the paragraphs with step 6 and 7. And I thought, man, I'm entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character and humbly ask him to remove my shortcomings. Boom, boom, 2 steps and 2 paragraphs in 5 minutes after all this sweat and bullets. And by the way, if you're stuck on a step, sometimes I think the steps are punishment when I'm doing them. But every time I take a step and get through with it, I look back and I go, why in the world didn't I do that before now? The steps aren't punishment. I have to tell myself over and over again that that's the way to freedom. It's not any punishment at all. So I think I do these steps 6 and 7, and instead of starting on an 8th step list, I just go on for the next couple of months because I know how I've loused up my life. I did all this inventory, now I'm just not going to be that guy. And I wound up being the same depressive, explosive, raging person that I always was, and I knew why. And that's a terrible spot to know you got character defects and there's nothing you can do about them. That's when I realized this is not a self-help program. It seemed like it at the time, but I don't have the necessary power to get rid of them. And I got into it with my father-in-law down at his house in Florida and yelled at him, cussed at him about his own boat, something, I don't know what it was. And I called my sponsor and told him about it. And he just laughs again. He said, congratulations, Hoss, you've been trying to remove your own character defects. He said, why don't you get on your knees, say the 7th step prayer like you mean it, and let's get busy on these amends. So I did that. And because I'd loused up that amend before, I just made a list and wrote down the harm I'd caused these people and left it blank. Here's a guy that already been through the steps, an unemotional third party, a guy that's already been through this and know how to do it. So I let him make suggestions, and I want to tell you some of those. And the first I want to tell you about is my wife, because I love her to death. I love her more than anything in the world, and I'm so grateful she stayed with me. We'll be married 45 years this year if we stay together. And Buff was about 2 years sober, and he showed me the literature where he wanted me to write her a letter. And so I wrote her the letter and handed it to her, and she read it and tore it up right in front of me. And I went back to Buff, and I said, well, that didn't work. What else do we do? And he said, that's all we can do. He showed me the literature. And that was still better than what I had tried to do. It prolonged things for a long time, but it was still better than what I'd done the first time. And she didn't leave me again. And so I thought, I was hearing about living amends. I'm going to have to make living amends to this woman. And I've tried my best to be the husband and father she deserves. And so we got along better. Things were getting better after that amends. And I thought they were better than they were, apparently. Because about 5.5 years later, we had to go to a family counselor with one of our sons that got in some trouble. And we weren't in there 5 minutes, and I found out all my infidelity, all that came up again. And I got some information from this counselor about what my wife wanted for an amends. And I took it back to my sponsor. And he said, what do you think about that? And I said, I don't think that'll work, and I think she'll leave me. And he said, could you stay sober if she does? And I didn't want to hear that because I wanted this marriage to work. He said, she needs closure. And that's when I realized I don't get to make amends to people the way I want to. I have to make it the way they want to without causing further harm. And I thought this would cause further harm, actually, but it hasn't. And so I got willing to make that amends to her. And I told her, I love you, and I don't think this will work, but if this is what you want, this is what I'll do. And that was 24 years ago, last December. And I've got a marriage today that's built on honesty and trust. I wouldn't trade my marriage with anybody. And if it hadn't been for the steps, I wouldn't have that today. And I work real hard trying to keep that slate clean. I want to tell you about my next door neighbor. My sponsor said, you know, we don't make amends to people. You don't just go tell them you're sorry. They know what a sorry son of a gun you are. He said, but this is easy. He said, you need to go apologize to him, and you need to plant him another weeping cherry tree. He said, now you don't need to tell him you know how it died. You know, that wouldn't add anything to his life. So I don't know about you, but when I get an amend that I'm supposed to make, these people just show up. And I'm coming home from the back room group a couple of days later, and I pull in my driveway, and there is my next door neighbor out there on his riding lawnmower. And my heart started beating. And I stopped at the foot of my driveway, and I said, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But, you know, give me the courage to do this, and please give me the right words to say it. And I got out of my car, and I walked around the 6-foot-high wood fence that I put up between us after he sued me to screen him out. And I walk over to him, and he sees me coming towards him, and he is panicked. I mean, I can see the whites of his eyes. I mean, we haven't spoken in years. This man does not want to see me, and he has a look on his face like, can I get this lawnmower in a high enough gear to outrun this guy, or should I abandon ship and run? I mean, he really does. But he didn't. He stopped and he turned the lawnmower off when I got over there. And I said, Mr. Logan, I want to talk to you a minute if I can. And he said, sure, I'll what is it, you know? And I said, I did a terrible thing for cutting your trees down. And I've disrespected you and your wife for a long time, and all that was wrong. And I'm trying to change some things in my life, and I don't know what I can ever do to make up for the damage I've caused you. But if there's anything I can do to make up for that damage, I'm willing to do whatever it is. Now, I didn't mean to say that. I really didn't. But I asked God to direct what came out of my mouth, and that's what I said. And I thought the man would just say, get off my property and don't you ever come near me again. Because that's how I dealt with people who got in my way, get out of my life, you know. And I really expected the man would do that because, I mean, sometimes we hurt people beyond their capacity to love us. And that's what they want to be left alone. And I thought that's what he would do. But instead he came over to me and he put his arms around me and he started hugging me and he started crying. He was sobbing on my shoulder. This man was about 80 years old at the time. And he's hugging me. And I am frozen. I don't know what to do with that. And he held me for a while, and then he pulled back away from me, and he looked me right dead in the eyes, and he said, what's in the past is over. He just forgave me, just like that. And my mind says, okay, he's forgiven you, run. I wanted to run away. And I would have if I hadn't had clear instructions from my sponsor about what to do. But I heard my sponsor's voice say, don't you run away, you got something to do here. And if I would have run away, I'd have missed what I'm going to get to tell you now. But I said, look, I really appreciate you forgiving me, but I want to do something to make up for this. And that's when he looked at me again. He said, you know, you already have. He said, the thing that hurt us the most all these years is that we'd lost our neighbor. And we've been praying every day that we'd get our neighbor back, and now our prayers have been answered. And I'd been pulling my driveway cussing him every day for years, and he'd been praying for me. My sponsor told me several years ago, he said, you know, if you ever get to where your higher power's not big enough, why don't you just borrow Mr. Logan's for a while? I said, well, thank you for forgiving me, but I really want to do something to make up for that. He said, you already have by coming over here. And I said, well, I noticed your cherry tree died over there. Can I plant you another one? And he said, oh, you don't have to do that. And I said, well, I'd like to if you'll let me. And he said, well, Ms. Logan would like that. And after I got sober, my business got worse for a long time because I'd made a lot of bad decisions, but it eventually got better, and I got to retire from it some years ago. But, you know, I didn't have any of my people anymore. And my son, who's now 41, was 12 at the time, and he and I went and got a bigger weeping cherry tree, and we planted it in this man's yard. And he wrote me a letter that I carry in my big book that I want to share with you. This is dated June 26, 1991. Dear Mike, it was with much surprise that we found a beautiful cherry tree in our yard when we returned home yesterday. We had not expected it so soon. We appreciate it so very much, and we will care for it, and we will cherish it always, not only for its own sake, for it is a beautiful tree, but because it symbolizes a deep and lasting friendship between us and you and your family. We pray that God will bless you and your family and all that you do, and we pray for ourselves, for we are a sinful people by nature. There are none of us without fault, and we need his constant love and forgiveness. Again, we thank you for the tree. We're all the more grateful because you did not have to do it. Your friendship means more to us than you know. Most sincerely, George Logan. This man gave us a country ham or a box of Omaha steaks every year for Christmas until he died. My father died about a year later, and the first flowers that came to the funeral home was a wreath of purple orchids from Mr. Logan. I've still got one of them on my desk. He died about 6 years later, and you guys have taught me to show up for graduations and weddings and funerals and stuff I thought I was too busy for. And I went over to this big Baptist church in my neighborhood, and this man had a lot of friends. It was full of people. And I didn't know a soul in there, but you guys, we suit up and show up. And I go in and I'm shaking hands in the receiving line, and I shake hands with this one man, and he said, oh, you're Mr. Allison. Dad told us all about you. I'm going, oh, wow. He said that you'd had a disagreement, but that you'd made it right. And I didn't make it right. I was just desperate enough to do what my sponsor told me to do. After I started making these amends, I started knowing a new freedom and a new happiness. My life got really good. I had the 10th step to clear up that wreckage of the present, and this 11th step to get closer to God. I'm trying to give this thing away and practice it in all my affairs. And I think I'm just doing great. I'm Mr. AA. I'm in Al-Anon. I'm in AA. Diane's in Al-Anon. Our boys are in Alateen. We're in Al-Dog and Al-Cat and everything you can belong to. I just am full of myself. And then one day I get a call from my son, my younger son's principal, 8th grade principal, said, we caught your son with some marijuana in his shoe, and he's out of school. We have zero tolerance for a year. Come get him now. I thought, no, that can't be happening. We're the recovery family. So we had to get him in an alternative learning center where I had to go pick him up every day within a 5-minute window of 2 o'clock every day for a year. And I had to leave work in the middle of the afternoon and go pick him up in this 5-minute window, either take him to our house in South Nashville or out to this sod farm that operated way out on the county line. And I had to work extra hours that year. And I'm thinking, I have such contempt for our investigation. It's like, why? Here I'm sober and sponsoring all these guys. This is my reward. My kid gets kicked out of school for weed, and I have to work extra hours. What it did, it forced me to spend time with my son that I wouldn't have spent because I worked all the time. And I've had a bond with him since then that's priceless. He's 37 now. He's been living up in Northern California for 17 years. He's a lot like me. He quit drinking about a year and a half ago on his own because of some problems that he had. And he can talk about that with me. And I told him, I said, look, I love you a lot, and I'm proud of the path you're on. I want you to know that if you don't go to A, don't think I'm going to love you any less. I love you just the way you are. And he says, well, I know what it's doing for you, so I know he's watching me. You guys like my tie? My granddaughter gave me this tie for Christmas several years ago. And I want to tell you about my granddaughter. I love my grandchild. About a year and a half ago, my granddaughter was going to graduate from high school, and she came to us and said, we were going to have a banner with her name on it, a big party, graduation party. She said, I don't want my name on the banner. And I said, why? And she said, well, something I've been meaning to tell you. It said, I'm transgender, and I've known I've been transgender since I was 12. And I've ordered a boy's cap and gown, and I'm going to go pick my diploma up with my new name. And I know that takes tremendous courage for somebody to do that. And I love my grandchild's still the same person. And I've had to grieve my granddaughter, that granddaughter I had, but I love my grandson. I always wanted a grandson anyway, so God. But you guys have taught me unconditional love, and he needs my love and support more than anything, so I'm grateful that I get to do that. I've had a really good time being here this weekend and being with you good folks. I love the theme of the convention this weekend. You know, spiritual life is not a theory. The book says we have to live it, but you know, the spiritual life is a theory. We get to live it. At some point in time, I realized I don't have to come to AA. I get to come here. I get to come here. And I really love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love my God. I love all you people, and I really love this good life. Thank you for letting me be here.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with, and it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down. And then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. And if that shows up, the gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.